El rabino Jonathan Sacks es uno de los líderes espirituales e intelectuales más aclamados de nuestra era. Filósofo de formación por la Universidad de Cambridge, con 17 doctorados honoris causa, Sacks es un pensador increíblemente prolífico e influyente. A lo largo de su carrera ha publicado más de 30 libros, haciéndose acreedor de numerosos premios y reconocimientos. Sacks ejerció el cargo de rabino principal del Reino Unido de 1991 al 2013 y en 2005 fue nombrado caballero por la reina Isabel II. 4 años después, el rabino fue declarado Lord vitalicio en la Cámara de los Lords del Reino Unido. Carlos, príncipe de Gales, lo ha descrito como una luz para nuestra nación y el ex primer ministro Tony Blair lo ha calificado como un gigante intelectual. Este mes de enero de 2018, el rabino Sacks estuvo en México y tuve el gusto de platicar con él para lanzar este programa que hoy estrenamos. Sesión Abierta es un nuevo espacio en el cual estaremos presentando conversaciones interesantes a personalidades que tengan algo sustancioso y apasionante que decir sobre los temas del momento: cultura, política, religión, tecnología, innovación. Un lugar para comentar, debatir y opinar. Ojalá que nos acompañes. Mi entrevista con Sacks duró casi media hora. Quise aprovechar mi tiempo con él para hablar de asuntos no comúnmente abordados con un rabino. Tampoco quise que mis preguntas fueran específicamente sobre judaísmo o temas judíos, ya que Sacks es ante todo un filósofo y un intelectual. En mi conversación con él hablamos sobre inteligencia artificial y espiritualidad, y le pregunté si los judíos tienen futuro en Europa, dado el resurgimiento del antisemitismo en ese continente. También le pregunté si la religión no es una forma de fake news. Algunas de sus respuestas me sorprendieron. Esto es Sesión Abierta. Rabbi Sacks, thanks so much for being here.
Delight to be with you.
I want to start by talking about the role of Judaism and religion in general in our present age of secularism, skepticism, fake news, alternative facts. Religion claims to have a moral authority over the important questions, like what is the meaning of life, or what is good, what is evil. But isn't religion basically a matter of competing and ultimately biased opinion?
You know, in this strange world of relativism and post-truth, there is one thing that even the most profoundly secular believe in, namely that God is an old man with a long white beard called Charles Darwin. And Darwin tells us that reproductive success is a good guide to adaptation to environment. Of course, Richard Dawkins, perhaps the world's most famous atheist,
Whom you have debated.
whom I have debated, coined the concept of a meme. In other words, something like a gene, only in the world of ideas. If that is the objective test, Jews and Judaism have survived longer than any other meme in the West, perhaps than any other meme in the world, under the most adverse circumstances. So here is a civilization twice as old as Christianity, 3 times as old as Islam, still young, still creative and flourishing. And that is truth in a world of half and quarter truths. So I think the case for Judaism has never been stronger.
We also live in a world of information overload, you might say. Our lives are increasingly dependent on technology. Machines have changed the way we interact, the way we work, the way we learn, even the way we find meaning and community. So I guess my first question in this regard is, are you, or should you, Rabbi Sacks, be worried about a robot stealing your job?
With the greatest pleasure. Any robot who wants my job can take it immediately.
Could a robot be a rabbi or hold a seat in the House of Lords, for that matter?
Some of them are, as you know. But I mean, the truth is that one of my ancestors, also a direct ancestor of both father and son chief rabbis Lau, was the Maharal of Prague, who created the golem, the world's first robot.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, another one of my ancestors, the Chacham Tzvi, was asked the question, can a robot count to make a minyan? To which he gave the answer, no. So a robot could be a rabbi, but couldn't make a minyan.
The Israeli historian Yuval Harari has written about the prospect of, in his view, humankind becoming increasingly godlike. You mentioned the golem. We are now, as a species, in the process of creating objects with the ability to understand, discern, even to acquire wisdom. In fact, one of the key questions that scientists are tackling in this regard is whether computers can develop not only intelligence, but actual consciousness. What is the Jewish view, or how does Judaism view consciousness?
Let's step back a bit, if I may. First of all, let's go back to the previous question. In an age of information overload. Let's go back to that for one moment. I once said faith is the ability to hear the music beneath the noise. Faith is like a Bose noise-cancelling set of earphones. In other words, in an age of information overload, you need tefillah. You need to focus on what is my ultimate meaning in the midst of all this overload. So I think faith becomes terribly important. Otherwise, we become slaves to the machines we created. Secondly, now to move on to man become godlike, what we are seeing is a reenactment of the kind of idolatry that Jeremiah and the other prophets found so ridiculous. You know, you carve an idol out of a piece of wood. Half the wood you use for an idol, the other half you throw in the fire to heat you up. And you bow down and say, this is my God. I mean, we are going back to that greatest of human follies, worshipping the work of our hands. Yuval Harari himself, I think, has not fully understood the contradiction at the heart of his system. We're talking about his second book, Homo Deus.
Correct.
Where he asks, where he says at the end, we are just an algorithm, and a not particularly significant one. So here we are, godlike, and yet nothing other than, a complex concatenation of microbiological organisms. And that is my point, actually, that if we think we are more than human, we end up being less than human. And there's no exception to that in history. And the person who saw this most clearly was Nietzsche. Nietzsche was the first person to say, we have become gods. We have killed God, and we must ourselves become gods to justify that fact. And Nietzsche himself noted that the greater our powers, the lower our self-esteem. With Copernicus, we were no longer the center of the universe. With
Darwin, with Freud,
etc., etc. We've become, we share 98% of our DNA with the chimpanzees. We are, said Richard Dawkins in one of his less guarded moments, a gene's way of producing another gene. I mean, no lower estimate has ever been given of human existence. We're an algorithm, that's all. If you think you are more than human, you will land up being less than human. That is an essential principle of Judaism to be found in the prophets and the Psalms.
But what does it mean to be more than human? I mean, humanity means creating something out of other objects, material.
The first essay on trying to be more than human is Genesis 11, the story of the Tower of Babel. Let us make a city and a tower that will reach heaven. So they build this high tower and they think they've reached heaven. And God says, let's go down and have a look and see what they're doing. In other words, only now in an age of aeroplanes when you're cruising at 32,000 feet and you're looking at the world's tallest building and you see how small it is. Only now can we fully sense the depth of the irony of that. When we think we can scale the heavens, do godlike things, that's the first sign that our particular civilization is about to implode. It's about to collapse.
And speaking about our place in history as a civilization, I want to switch gears a bit and talk about the rising tide of racism and extremism, whether it is in Europe or the United States, in Latin America, Middle East, and both from the right and the left, it seems that the virus of hatred, of fanaticism has a comeback. My question is, what would be, in your view, the single worst mistake that humanity has committed in the last 50 or 60 years?
I need to step back just a tiny bit. Okay. There was a mistake, and it did happen in the last 60 years, but I need to step back.
Okay.
In the 17th century, Europe was scarred by wars of religion, Catholic against Protestant after the Reformation. And good, serious people, with the best of intentions, said, look at this, Protestant, Catholic, these are two forms of identity. Whenever people have identity, they identify with their group as against the other group, and they love the guys in their group and hate the guys in the other group, and they fight wars. All social animals do that kind of thing. So in the 18th century, in the Enlightenment, people said, let's abolish identity.
Correct.
And let's do so in the name of the universal.
Correct.
Kant said the only ethics that are ethical are universal. And, you know, I take the high point of that, the last movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, where he sets to music Schiller's words, alle Menschen werden Brüder, all human beings will be brothers. So they tried to abolish identity. In the 19th century, identity came roaring back in the form of three substitutes for religion: nation-state, race, and class, working class. In the 20th century, the nation-state gave us 2 world wars. The Aryan race gave us the Holocaust. The class struggle gave us Stalin,
communism,
the Gulag, and the KGB. So that was the first mistake, the attempt to escape from identity into the universal. In the last 60 years, we've been engaged in a second attempt to escape identity, not in terms of the universal, but in terms of the individual, the self, the selfie. We are the selfie culture. You know, people used to come together in a community to listen to music. Today, you listen on your Bluetooth earbuds. Everyone's on their own. As Sherry Turkle of MIT calls it, we're alone together. Now, a very great sociologist, a Jewish one actually, called Emil Durkheim, foresaw such a situation 120 years ago, and he called it anomie. Anomie is a situation where we no longer share a moral community. When that happens, he said, people will be driven to suicide. We now know that people are driven to become suicide bombers. People will go to extremes because, starved of identity, they will turn anywhere to find it because we can't live without it. That was the big mistake the West made in the 1960s by going overboard in favor of the individual is sovereign.
But now we are seeing a kind of identity politics and tribalism and nativism, which also has become very negative and destructive.
100%. That's the return of the repressed. Just as happened in the 19th century, so in the 21st, you get new tribes. Only nowadays they're around gender or around whatever it is. And these are new tribes, but we're still back into tribalism. Now, the oldest and biggest of the tribes were religions. They were also the longest lasting. They were also, given where we are in the 20th century, 21st century, the world's first global systems. So, you know, I think we have to work through, at least this is my part of the thing. I don't see everyone is there. We have to work through what would happen if religion came back as people's way of finding identity. If that were to happen, we would have serious work to do. Because Jews, Christians, and Muslims have had a history of giving and receiving great pain. So we've got work to do.
And speaking of pain, do Jews have a future in Europe?
I don't know. I believe that in some countries they're facing such anti-Semitism that they are leaving. That is in mainland Europe. I don't want to single out individual countries. It's not fair to talk of any community but one's own. As far as Britain is concerned, I think the State of Israel has made a big difference. In 1938, when 32 nations came together in the French spa town of Evian, knowing that an immense human catastrophe was about to happen to the Jews of Germany and of Europe, anywhere Hitler ruled, they came together, and not one of the 32 countries, including Britain, America, Australia, opened their doors. At that moment, Jews knew that over the whole surface of the earth, there wasn't 1 square inch that they could call home in the Robert Frost sense as the place where when you have to go there, they have to let you in. That's when the State of Israel became morally necessary. And today, given the State of Israel, every Jew in the world has a home, which means that in countries where anti-Semitism can be confronted and defeated, we have a duty to stay and fight because our enemies want us to leave. They would love nothing better than for the Jews to leave Europe. Then Europe is open to some serious, dangerous political outcomes. And the people who stand up in defense of freedom always have been Jews. You get rid of Jews, you get rid of freedom's greatest defenders. So I'm not going to turn and run right now because that's really what our enemies want.
But then you have so many young Jews, both in Europe and in the United States, who don't feel any particular connection with Israel. In fact, are show antipathy for the Jewish state. So,
look, there has been a long tension between Israel and the diaspora, and it goes back long before the birth of the state. It was a doctrine called Shlilat HaGolah, the rejection of the diaspora. You know, Zionists would tell you there's only one place to be a Jew. And I respect and appreciate that. I really do. But if you go around denying anyone who lives somewhere else, don't be surprised if people who live somewhere else feel distant from you.
But don't you think that the connection between young Jews around the world and Zionism, the Zionist ideal, has reached a breaking point that we've never seen before?
It may have done so in some sections of American Jewry, but I guarantee you it has not happened in Europe. In Europe, we live closer to Israel. All our kids go and spend time there.
That's correct.
They know it, they love it, they're very Zionist. Some of them may be critical of this government or that, but that doesn't mean to say they aren't totally loyal to the state as a whole. We're a very Zionist community.
Let me ask you something about what some have been calling a kind of quote-unquote Holocaust fatigue, whether it is in film or literature or education. There appears to be a kind of numbing effect, both within the Jewish public, but especially among the general audience, regarding the memory of the 6 million Jews who were murdered. In your view, are we experiencing a kind of Holocaust fatigue?
In 1999, Tony Blair, who was then Prime Minister, asked me if we wanted a national Holocaust Memorial Day on January 27. And I said to him, as Jews, we don't need it. We have our own Yom HaShoah, and for us it is a grief observed. We are all mourners. We all literally or metaphorically lost family in the Holocaust, and we'll never forget that. But I said there is a case for a National Holocaust Memorial Day given 2 conditions. Number one, that it's not just a national ceremony, but it is taken into every school in Britain. the way Martin Luther King Day is done in America. So it becomes part of every kid's education. And secondly, without minimizing the significance of the Holocaust, we use the Holocaust to frame other people who have experienced suffering, such as the people of Rwanda or many others. And we used to do that every year. And it had a huge effect in drawing public attention, for instance, to Rwanda and other enormous disasters, Bosnia, Kosovo, and the rest. So in Britain, we don't have Holocaust fatigue. Britain was the first country, probably the only in the world, and this was Tony Blair and Gordon Brown between them, where the government pays for every school in Britain, every school, to send 2 children and a teacher to Auschwitz. So that when it comes to Holocaust Memorial Day, they speak from their own experience of it. And I always, on Holocaust Memorial Day, would go to a school. Almost always there were no Jewish students in the school. The kids came from 40 to 60 different ethnic groups, and there was every single school and every kid I ever met understood immediately what the Holocaust meant to them. It meant, you fight for tolerance or you lose it. So I never sensed any Holocaust fatigue. What I do sense is that for a very long time, when you look in bookshops, in real life or on the internet, under Judaica, almost everything there is about the Holocaust. Now, when Steven Spielberg did Schindler's List, I wrote him a letter congratulating him. I thought it was a brilliant film, a magnificent film. But I've said, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Zachor. You've showed how Jews died. Now show how Jews live. That's what I tried to do in Britain for 22 years, whether it was BBC television or radio or what I wrote for the national press. Show people how Jews live. Because if the only time you talk about Jews is the Holocaust and Jews dying, then Jews become, one of the early historians of the Holocaust, Lucy Ravidovitz, said, I am worried that I may, she worried that what she started had become a tsunami. And she said, I'm worried that kids will grow up and learn about the Greeks and how they lived, about the Romans and how they lived, about the Jews and how they died. That was Lucy Davidovitz. So I think we have now to shift the balance from past to future, remembering for the future, and insisting that the most important 2 words that Moses taught the Israelites were uvacharta v'chaim, choose life.
And on a personal side, you mentioned film. What is your favorite Jewish movie?
Look, as a kid, I was very moved by Exodus. And Elaine and I had the great privilege a few years ago of having as our guest for lunch on Rosh Hashanah, Yossi Harel, the commander of the Exodus, and his wife Julie. I have to say they were secular Jews, and it was Rosh Hashanah. So when lunch was over, we took them downstairs, and there our chazan and choir were having lunch. And I said, here is one of the mega heroes of our time, one of the mythical heroes of our time. Do a concert for him. With 0 notice, they did an impromptu concert for Yossi and Julie Harel. And their daughter told me that they remembered that day for the rest of their lives. It was one of the most beautiful moments they ever had.
And the music of that film is sensational.
Yeah, so I used that music in a double CD that I made on Israel's 60th anniversary. We made a lot of music for that moment.
What is your favorite piece of music?
Look, I mean, I've done many programs of favorite music. For me, obviously, the most exciting thing that I had as chief rabbi was I decided, look, I do a lot of talking, and words are the language of the mind, but music is the language of the soul, and music can do things I never can. So I, as chief rabbi, worked with chazonim and choirs, and we did a lot of new music, much of which is very, very dear to me, including the special setting of Ashrei that they did for my induction, which is now sung at all inductions. We did a new setting of Oseh Shalom for Israel's 60th anniversary, which you can see on YouTube and wherever we go in the world. They sing it to us. And that Jewishly, a lot of Jewish music speaks to me because it comes straight from the soul. But spiritually, among non-Jewish music, I have to say, the late quartets of Beethoven. There was a man who had been deaf for 20 years, and he journeyed inward to places that no composer had ever been before or ever since. And those late quartets are, a taste of heaven, really.
The theme music for this show that we are launching today is Bach's Goldberg Variations. That is my favorite.
Well, Goldberg Variation sounds very Jewish.
It sounds Jewish.
Exactly.
It's not, but it sounds.
But Bach was. Don't forget, in his day, people thought that Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach was the greater composer. And I think Jews should take some pride, even though it's only ethnic, not religious, that it was Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn, who really reintroduced the world to the music of Johann Sebastian.
That's correct.
He gave the first serious performance of the Matthew Passion, and thereafter, Johann Sebastian Bach was recognized for the genius he was. There's something heavenly about there's something heavenly about all great music.
That's correct. We can agree on that. Rabbi Sachs, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Many thanks.
Thank you.